Right. Okay. I've already seen a number of hands, as they say.
Two quite trite and shallow points, but I want to make them and hope they'll provoke an interesting bit of discussion. Jonathan, I understand why you said we've got this one chance and never again. I think really the only chance for Blue Labour is if they're absolutely decimated at the next general election, and then Paul Embry, yourself, and Lord Glassman can kind of go, okay, that was the shock therapy. Maybe Wales will do the trick, I don't know. But I worry...
If you think about the MPs that will be left, that might be quite difficult, but yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Which leads to my second point, which is that, which Jonathan, I understand you won't be able to comment on, is that it seems to me that we're in this paradoxical situation where it is quite likely if Keir Starmer is removed, because Wales goes as badly as most people think it will do, that he gets replaced by Ed Miliband, who... because they're bleeding votes to more the Greens than anyone else. And paradoxically, he put Lord Glassman in the Lords because he used to read Blue Labour stuff and think it was quite intelligent, but of course is now weirdly the furthest away from Blue Labour that there is. So it's kind of a shallow who's going to be next leader thing, but you can see I'm trying to get to a deeper heart of the problem.
Thank you. This is a question inspired by what Frank said about empowering communities, which is very important. So I would like to know if Reform, and Blue Labour specifically, have actual policies that can empower communities to create cultural and economic capital. I'm not asking about Labour because I think so far they have shown us that, their policies, the policies that they implement, that they have a global focus rather than a community focus. And when I say communities, I want to clarify that I don't mean the abstract idea of community, the gay community, the black community, the green activism community, but actual communities based on territory, locality, and so on. So I'm very interested to know, especially if Reform and Blue Labour, mostly, if they have these actual policies.
So I'm quite an unusual beast in that I'm a member of the Labour Party. I've travelled quite a long way. I rejoined the Labour Party after many years when Corbyn was elected leader. It's incredible, I know, to my shame. I thought a lot about Corbyn, and I feel that Corbyn was basically led a middle-class metropolitan elite who despised, as Paul Embry says, the working class. And I think without the working class, Labour is dead. But my sort of criticism of Blue Labour is that I, as a member of the Labour Party, I want to get involved. I see Blue Labour as just a bunch of talking heads who are quite famous, like you and like Lord Glassman and like a few, and Paul Embry and so on. But I want to get involved. There needs to be members and rank and file and people who can actually do the legwork. I want to do the legwork. I have emailed the Blue Labour website without a reply. I've done it about 4 times. No one's got back to me. You need more people on the ground to get people like me involved.
Right. My name's Sebastian. I work for the SDP, and we actually campaigned in Runcorn and Helsby, which Reform won back in May. And whilst campaigning, I was really surprised because I thought there'd be a lot more love for Reform. And knocking on doors, a lot of people there were very suspicious. And a lot of them were voting Reform, but said they were really suspicious that because they've lived through that, the Thatcher era where we deindustrialised, where we sold off our assets, often abroad, and offshore jobs. And they're worried that that's going to happen again. Likewise, on sort of the other side of Labour, so probably for Jonathan, I think people are worried that net zero is just going to do the exact same thing. It seems like a completely delusional policy. And as William Clouston, leader of the SDP, often says, this is not a charity, the UK. It's not a shop. It's our home. And which of you and which of your movements do you think is more likely going to resonate with that message?
I think for the last few decades, we've been run by traitors. Left and right, and Keir Starmer is the classic example of this. He's a Davos man, as he said himself. He's rubbing shoulders all over the world. He barely spends any time at all in Britain. he's hanging out with all his globalist buddies, and they're all calculating how they're going to enforce whatever it is on all of us. And this isn't just in Britain; it's all across Europe, all across Australia, and lots of places. So I feel that the working class have been disenfranchised in the last few decades, worse than we were 200 years ago when hardly anyone had the vote. Because what the vast majority of people in this country want is completely ignored by the ruling classes.
How are you going to transform the current Labour Party with its Covenant Clause 4 definition, which was gutted by Tony Blair? That's my question to both of you.
Great. I don't know who to go to first. Lots of excellent points. I thought just quickly something you mentioned, Frank, that working class people aren't interested in economics. I mean, it might not be expressed as sort of, I'm a sort of Keynesian or, I'm reading Hayek, but the idea that people aren't interested when the factories they used to work in, the houses are getting more expensive, the jobs are being offshore, they can't get secure work, their kids can't afford housing. The idea that people aren't interested in that is kind of for the birds. I agree, it's not expressed in these kind of technical ways, and it's often expressed in kind of the language of sovereignty. But I think take back control shouldn't just be about sort of parliamentary sovereignty. It should be about economic sovereignty and sort of economic nationalism. So just quickly on that, the gentleman there who said he wanted to get involved with Blue Labour, I sort of had a similar experience and then sort of barged my way in by being a sort of aggressive Twitter anon for a while. And then sort of get invited to sort of speak and write on various Blue Labourist things. But I think the Blue Labour is a kind of paradoxically, it sort of talks about the working class and kind of old sort of trade union socialism and guild socialism. It's actually led by a sort of 5 or 6 London-based intellectual guys, PhD guys, Jonathan Rudder. I love these guys, don't get me wrong, right? But, you've got Dan Carter, he's a former Corbynite, a gay guy, and then you've got a sort of Jewish trumpeter, Chase. But, this isn't like working class Britain, it's not what people think when they think of Blue Labour. They think of sort of flat cap reactionaries, But I do think I agree with you. I think it needs to have sort of a much more member-led orientation, almost like a sort of Blue Labour momentum, if you like, It needs a presence in CLPs, it needs a presence at a conference, it needs its own events. It can't just be a bunch of intellectuals, yeah, exactly.
Just hold on.
We
We don't have to go Philistine, right? Just because they're not... Yeah, intellectuals are not necessarily the enemy in...
I agree, but you also need. I think you also need something that resembles a mass movement. I would actually like to hear from Gwen, because on sort of. I mean, the Tories have said that at their conference that Farage was a socialist, so it's interesting to hear. I mean, obviously they're pivoting away, as Jonathan said, away from that sort of Thatcherite angle, nationalised steel. They're sort of attacking the Bank of England's sort of subsidy for commercial banks. On winter fuel, on all that kind of 2-child benefit cap. I think they've been more welfareist than Labour, and we could go into the next election with the Reform Party with a more sort of robust industrial strategy programme than the Labour Party, potentially. So again, these kind of left-right divides traditionally are being broken down. We see it in America. There was a rare earths processing facility that was meant to be being opened in Hull, and the investors have just pulled out because Donald Trump's Republican administration is basically de-risking the investment. You've got a right-wing Republican administration that's more prepared to intervene on behalf of industry so they can protect American jobs and protect American economic sovereignty than a left-wing Labour government.
Okay,
yeah.
So. Right, no, it's all right. Just because I'm keen to get everybody in. Sure. Right, I'm going to rush over to Gawain and then work backwards so that we're not too over Blue Labour-fied at the start. Yeah, go on.
Okay, thank you. Something about Nigel Farage. When he left school, went straight to work in the city, he worked for the Metals Exchange. It was just as the Big Bang started. All his mates were getting loaded, absolutely fat on the land. He saw Thatcherism as this amazing boon because everybody he knew was having a whale of a time. However, since then, since he's been a politician, he has spent the last 25, 30 years spending his time where places people vote for what I call the tribe. Was UKIP, Brexit, now Reform. And these are not leafy Surrey. The places he's been spending his time and listening, and one thing you'll notice with Farage when you're on the stump with him, he hardly talks at all. He hardly says a word. He might prompt somebody to say a few, if they sort of star appeal, can't know what to say. But he listens. And what he has heard across these islands is the damage that globalization and the Big Bang has done. The people he listens to are those who have suffered because of the thing that he used to believe in so strongly. So whilst you were saying earlier, we are more laissez-faire, I think that is true. That is in his gut, his heart. But he has seen the impact of the globalization and how that has harmed the working class communities of this country. So that's why he's got that ability to change things. I'd say it was funny when Kemi Badenoch said that we were to the left of Jeremy Corbyn. No, we really aren't.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, just 2 points to make in relation to the sort of collection of comments. The first one is, I think, to the nice man from the SDP's point. I actually did a couple of focus group reform voters quite soon after the Runcorn by-election. They were very worried. You're right. They were hopeful about reform. They had hesitations about Farage, but were pretty worried as well. They were worried they were going to be sold out, just like Boris Johnson had sold people out before, like other politicians sold out. They were particularly worried about privatising the NHS, which brings me on. I think Ed was right to mention Wales. It's going to be a huge moment. We've got a preview of that this Thursday, which I'm very excited about, the care for the by-election, to see what happens there for the Senate. But I watched an interview this morning that was with the Reform candidate, and he was asked whether Reform were going to privatise the NHS, and he couldn't give an answer. And I think if the care for the by-election is as close as the Runcorn parliamentary by-election was, you'll probably have, and if Reform lose, I think it will be down to that interview and down to not being able to give a good answer on that question, which I think probably goes to Frank's point. Then secondly, and this might sound unnecessarily provocative, especially to some of the Blue Labour people here, but there was laughter in the room when Ed suggested that Ed Miliband could be the next leader of the Labour Party. Ed Miliband has every right to think he might be the next leader of the Labour Party. He's by far the most popular member of the cabinet with members and also with Labour voters. And actually, I think there's a question here for some people, for Blue Labour, I think generally as a project, which is very usual for party members to be on, further down the political spectrum, either left or right, than their party voters and their party politicians. That is completely standard. It is highly unusual for them to be completely at odds with them. And I think that is a question for some of Blue Labour, is that actually with the base who do really like Ed Miliband, who would like to accelerate towards net zero, who feel very strongly about things like Gaza and who might be pro-migration, it's very difficult to fight against that, not just to be a less extreme version of it.
Yeah, I think there's a danger of having a 1950s debate, which basically poses nationalization as left-wing and non-nationalization as right-wing. In the real world of the 21st century, we have to understand that being for state intervention or nationalization is not necessarily left-wing. I mean, all you got to do is look at Mussolini's Italy and a whole number of fairly right-wing authoritarian governments over the last century who basically nationalize a lot of industries and who are calling for intervention. On the European continent, most of the right-wing populist parties believe in state intervention, and they all believe in nationalizing certain industries and cutting themselves off from the world market. That's not because they're left-wing. That's because they've decided that's the policy that works for their country. So what I worry about is that very often when I hear socialist economics being projected as this is our socialist economic policies, this is really a hand-me-down 1950s policy that's being recycled for our time, which isn't going to do the business. Because what we need are economic policies that are context-specific. And sometimes they will involve nationalizing. Sometimes they involve, privatizing maybe even. It very much depends upon those kind of circumstances, and that's what we got to think. I don't think you should call politicians traitors, although some of them, sort of fit the bill. I think there's a danger of people like us in this room criticizing the political parties, denouncing the politicians, and not really understanding our own role. Because at the end of the day, we have a role in terms of being members of the public, of putting forward critical, intellectually sort of sound ideals that we want politicians to respond to. And I think the key thing in the end of the day is not what Blue Labour or Reform does, it's what the British people are capable of asking. It's the capacity of the British people to rise to the occasion, as they're not doing. I mean, I think the flagging movement is wonderful, the way, certainly where I live, people are suddenly becoming politically active and are trying to play the role of responsible citizens. So I think the emphasis that we got to have is on the demand for the voice side of things, rather than people who aspire or pretend to try to give that representation real content.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah, so quite a few directed towards me, so I'll fly through them. Just on the organisation point, I totally get you. I agree. I was one of you a couple of years ago, so I totally get it. I'm working on it. And if you're familiar with some of the people involved, you'll realise why maybe organisational matters are not their strong point. Message well and truly received. On the community focus, I think that's a huge part of the Blue Labour kind of policy set, which we haven't developed as much as we should do. But I think, the idea that we have, more cooperatives, more workers on boards, not huge state giants necessarily, actually having more of a community focus, reducing inequality with public investment in those communities. I think that's a key part of it that links the kind of macro to the micro in that regard. On the Clause 4 stuff, I mean, that's process. I'm not too worried about that. The politics will, change what it needs to when it needs to. So I'm not really too worried about that. Just to come back on Frank's point, I totally agree with Jonny about the kind of economics not being important. If you want to call it jobs and cost of living, fine, but it absolutely is important, and immigration is linked to that. So I'm not for a second suggesting that we don't need to tackle immigration. As Claire will know, and others, I'm one of the strongest voices in the Labour Party saying we need to sort this out, because we're not going to get a hearing on anything else until we actually do sort out the illegal immigration. And by the way, there's good economic arguments against the kind of legal migration that we've seen on the scale that we saw particularly under the last Conservative administration. Absolutely. And just to finish on the kind of the point that Frank was making about the FU element of people voting for reform, I think that is a real danger. I don't think Reform are anywhere near ready for power, and they could well really fail. So I think it's a huge danger for us. I could totally understand why people would say, we're going to roll the dice anyway, but it is going to be a huge risk because there really isn't that much there. I don't know whether I've missed a question.
No, that's fine. No disrespect. Right. Okay. The one thing that I think the gentleman at the front said very well was that people have been effectively disenfranchised. Because we get told anyway, you kind of vote for something and it's ignored. But it's not just ignored, it's also the process has been put in place to actually ring fence off certain decisions from any popular pressure at all. So that's, when people say, oh, it's the law, we can't do it, it's international law, or it's this or is that. But the reason I'm saying that is because Frank made the point about we've got to up, or the public have got to up their game. I mean, I do think one of the things that I'd be interested in is, it's not the reforms perfect, but how do you have political change? That's really what the question is. Like, one thing's saying the reform can't do it, but then surely the point is to have the public up its game to put pressure on whatever emerges. But it's also the case, can it be even remotely feasible, and there might be some Tories in, so you're allowed, that the legacy parties can revive? Because they don't look like they're ever going to recover.
Yeah, so I stood for the Brexit Party at a quarter thinking about reform. And I'm very interested in what Frank's saying. I'd kind of half thought, because I live in Scotland and it's small and you opportunities, I thought if I was going to set up a party, what would it be called? That said, it would be the Common Sense Party. And then I thought, no, it would be the Common Sense Referendum Party, because I thought, well, one of the great things about Brexit was that you got people having to take themselves seriously. Like, I didn't know what Brexit stood for before I actually eventually worked. I didn't even know what it meant. I remember asking a colleague, say, what does Brexit actually mean by that? Oh, yeah, of course, Brexit, Britain exit, right? That's stupid. Yeah. Anyway, my question is, what role can referendums play? Because that seems like a really brilliant way that you can actually get the public directly involved, taking themselves seriously on major policy matters, in a way that at the minute I don't think the public are involved. And it feels like that could have a transformative impact on politics.
I grew up in a council house in Preston. My dad was a low-paid municipal worker. I once went to school with no heel on my right shoe because it had fallen off. It was the only pair of shoes I had.
Speak into the microphone,
So
shout.
I once went to school with no heel on my right shoe because it was the only pair I had, right? Now, everything in my background means I should be a Labour voter and a Blue Labour supporter. And I once was a Labour Party member. And in the constituency of then Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Mrs Margaret Hilda Thatcher. That shows you how long ago it was. Now, at that time, I think the Labour Party could be characterised as a decent organisation with a few nasty elements in it. People who really should have been in the Communist Party. I think that has now been reversed. It's basically an utterly debased organisation with a few decent individuals in it. And I'll grant you your one, Jonathan. And the reason for that is that the subject that has not been mentioned at all here today, and that's the grooming gang scandal, because all over the country, local authorities that have been overwhelmingly Labour controlled have ignored and to the point of actively facilitating the rape and sexual abuse of thousands, tens of thousands of young women in order to protect a voting bloc that they created. That is why I think the Labour Party now, and I speak as an ex-Labour Party member, has forfeited the moral right to exist. And the fact, Jonathan, that you couldn't mention that. You couldn't mention that when you were, instead all you've been able to do is suggest a few retrospective, old-fashioned economic ideas of the sort that Frank identified, shows that, with the greatest of respect, nothing you have said has the slightest shred of credibility.
Very quickly, I was the Labour mayor of Newham from 2002 to 2018, and we started to fly the flag in 2006 because we are old Labour and believe in the working class view. And Frank, you're wrong. Old Labour was always patriotic. NATO, the atomic bomb, whether you think that's a good idea or not, was always patriotic. That's who we are and who we were. But now we find, I hear what Blue Labour are saying, and I'm greatly sympathetic, obviously, but people will not believe us because we cannot deliver on services. People aren't stupid. They look around and say, you can't do immigration. The Labour Party said they'd build 300,000 homes a year. Not a bloody chance of doing that. And they know it. There's the NHS where you have to queue like a Soviet system. There's benefits where people are better not to work. People see that in their communities. They don't believe us. I will say in Newham, we did do that. We not only made no cuts, we froze council tax for 10 years and got the biggest support anywhere in the country from a place which had about a third Muslim supporters, because they were supporting the idea of doing something in the environment and locally. The police, things like that's what we've got to focus on, but I see no evidence that the Labour government's doing that, and if it doesn't, Blue Labour will be tarred with the same image and will all be swept out next time.
Hi, and we've touched on disenfranchisement of voters. One thing that's not been discussed in any of the debates I've been in is the suspension of local elections. And I just wonder how people expect voters in my area east of England to feel.
I think it's becoming obvious that the Blue Labour representatives are really just a kind of cartoon emblem of Labour, because they're still talking about the old paradigm of left and right and Thatcher policies that Reform might be following or not. But the fact is that Reform are on the back foot because they have just such a groundswell of support and they can't get their policies together, but nobody seems to care anyway. They're just going to vote for Reform because maybe it's a riposte, maybe it's some kind of report that they want to make and just say this is not working. But as a shy Reform voter, I will be voting for them. I don't know what their policies are, but they are daring to mention the thing that we all know is the big problem, and that is legal and illegal immigration.
I was just wondering how the panel think Labour's expansion of the electorate to include 16-year-olds will impact on how working class people vote. was just reading Joel Budd's Underdogs, and he's highlighting the the age-related differences on issues like migration.
Hi, thank you so much. Well, Jonathan, I really appreciate your voice, because it seems like the whole Labour Party, especially the cabinet, are just a bunch of robots that come out and just regurgitate the same vacuous platitudes, and I think everyone can see through it. I think one of the reasons, in my view, the Labour Party doesn't seem to stand for anything is because all they seem to care about is how do we win votes and how do we stop losing votes. We see that in this Muslim bloc vote that we talk about. And I think something that's just disgraceful is this attack we've had on the synagogue. And Starmer seems very happy to call things far right quite easily and label it with an ideology. But to this day, he's still not said the word Islamist attack or anything to do with Islamism. It's just extremism. And I just think, we're talking about people's lives and people's safety. And if I was a normal Muslim, it would be insulting to me that you can't call out a terrorist, if if that is true, then, what does that say?
Thank you. I'm Monica, and I work for the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. And as we know, there have been a lot of bills passed this year. The two most horrific ones going through the Lords right now. The first being the assisted suicide bill, and the second being decriminalising abortion up to birth, which I think most of us can agree is horrific. What does each panellist suggest to combat this culture of death that is plaguing our country and in turn affecting the quality of our lives, which is directly voted for by our politicians and affecting the working class as well as other areas?
I ran in the last election on electoral reform around direct democracy, and I think a few people have mentioned the thought that, because we're talking about how do those that have no voice get a voice, and I believe that if we actually created regular referendums for the people to aggregate those thoughts together, is that not the most direct way that we can say, parties, this is actually what we want? Because you're all up there saying, we're a new idea, we're guessing what you want, we're guessing what the blue collar workers want, but really we need to hear their voices directly. So I'd love to hear your opinions around direct democracy and how that could help change things.
Yes, I think working class people have an innate sense of fairness, and I grew up in Birmingham, which when I grew up in the sort of 70s and 80s was a multi-ethnic society, and we all rubbed along together. And both parties, Tories and Labour, for different reasons. So Tories seeing people as economic units, which damaged the working class. The Labour Party thought that we should be really, really diverse instead of thinking of British people, including people of all different skin colours. And I've had boyfriends of all different skin colours when I was younger. And really, what you should say to people when they come into this country that you will belong to one culture. You can be we are very multi-ethnic, but we have one culture, the British culture, and the working class people are very admirable members of that.
I just have a quick word for Jonathan and then one for Frank. Jonathan, I hear your words in earnest. Being very honest, the Labour Party certainly needs to return to its roots, remember its original purpose and its mandate. But it did occur to me you'd probably be better off in another party. You could probably serve ordinary people better by joining another party that has momentum, it has the impetus, and it's likely to win the next election.
Right, quick.
Look, but just backing that with facts, you've admitted yourself that you don't have the numbers to make this change. So your Blue Labour, whilst it may be well-meaning, it may take you 15 years to get to the point where it can really be a feature. And at the moment, if we have 4 more years of red Labour, there's going to be no country left. It's the antithesis of what this country needs. That's Starmer. So there needs to be a massive change.
Right.
The lady there hit the nail on the head that the policies we reform don't necessarily matter. It's a vibes-based party, and it's basically none of the above, Big Ten, fuck off, we want to destroy you all type vote. Maybe it goes to the election that'll change and you need to set things out in more detail, but for now you're doing very well with that sort of broad base.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to pick up on this old policies critique. Well, has what people want from their lives fundamentally changed? It's about, as Frank says, reacting to the context. Yes, absolutely. But not everything that's traditional or worked in the past is bad, and not everything that's modern and futuristic and comes out of the Tony Blair Institute is good.
Perfect sentence. You rank.
Yeah, I think that Claire asked the question, is it possible to save the legacy parties? You look around Europe and you realize that in Britain, the legacy parties have lasted longer than anywhere else, except for the CDU in Germany. I think that the dynamic within both of the Lib Dems as well, the three parties, is one where you can see that there is something that's missing. And that unraveling process has now reached a point of no return, thank God, because I think they were responsible for a lot of bad things. And I think that as a result of that, we have to look for other alternatives, not necessarily reform, but reform is well worth a punt, but other potential solutions. We have to look towards those, because otherwise you're going to left with zombie parties where there are a few good individuals like the people here, but by and large the parties themselves are not fit for purpose.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'll just pick up on the votes for 16. My instinct is it's going to hurt Labour more than it will help them, and that's for a whole variety of reasons. And I'll just say one other thing, which is that picking slightly on Reform here, but I saw a TikTok that Reform used, which was clearly targeting 12 or 13-year-old votes, which in some ways is very fair game because they now will be eligible to vote at the next election. But I don't like that, and I wish we hadn't given votes to 16-year-olds.
I share that disquiet. In Reform, we're well aware we have issues with both personnel and policy, i.e. we don't have enough of either. No, it's absolutely true. The thing is that the legacy parties have been around for quite a long time, so they have got a big back catalogue of policy and ideas and things like that. We're in the process of developing all that now.
Right.
Question is about people who have arrived in this country legally within their lifetimes. I think they are, speaking of legacy parties, they are political blank slates. So they are completely open to whichever party has the best offering for them. But there is a subtext that Reform is not friendly to them. What would you have to say to this contingent of voters?
Very good question.
Question for everybody, primarily for Gawain and Reform. Immigration's a really important question, but it's only one. And the other question that's related to it is welfarism. There's about 4.5 million people on welfare in this country, working class money, supporting them. So you could try zero immigration policy, and you've still got nowhere near even attacking the economic failure and the sheer complacency. So that's really important. Reform's nowhere near addressing that, and you just need to get on with it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm thinking of voting for you, but at the moment I'm still just thinking about it.
Just to talk about the Westminster bubble and, and obviously the turmoil that's happened in Germany at the moment with the green policies. And then I can't understand how Miliband is still in position after the energy people were in Parliament last week and they said that the gas price could halve. It would make no difference to our bills because of the amount of subsidies our bill actually pays. It's got nothing to do with the energy you consume, the gas price. We're suffering with the highest energy costs ever. And, he's in control of it. So why didn't he sack him? It's just ridiculous now. It's not for the people and the cost of living. Thank you.
I just wanted to say about what Gawain said. It was quite throwaway, but you said, I'm a posh boy, basically. And that's so refreshing. My family back up, I'm posh as well, right? But my family back in Sunderland, where I'm originally from, they hate it when you see Labour politicians. It's like, the Four Yorkshiremen sketch. That's basically when they do interviews, they're tripping over themselves. And I think it reveals a much bigger question here, which I don't think we've addressed. It's not just whether you represent the voice of the working class, but why. And I think that working class people can tell that Keir Starmer only is doing action on immigration because of the polls, and that if Labour was 20 points ahead, would they be doing anything? No. And and at the core of why Reform's popular is because they know that people actually agree with them.
So I'm a commercial finance broker. So my customers are people who work in the Midlands, own a factory, and employ the middle class or the working class. a lot of them are really desperate, and the policies that come out from the government seem to harm them constantly. So on the subject of what are your party's policies, there's about 30% of the country that's self-employed. That's a big swathe of people you could win over to your parties. How will you create policy to incentivize the small business owner, because they employ most of the people in the country?
Yes, you've got.
So I'm quite proudly part of the disenfranchised youth. I mean, I have no trust in the Conservatives, in Labour, in Reform, in any of the major parties, and I would say that that's because, as far as I can see, there has been no accountability, and it's not just in the UK, it's across the globe, that I see that promises after promises that are made and there is nothing done about them. And to the person that said that they don't care about the policies of reform and they will vote for them, I think that's embarrassing. I think anyone that says that they do not care about the parties and they will blindly vote for somebody, how can you accept that? You know, the reason that we are allowing these people to make the decisions that they can make is because we do not hold them accountable. You know, and we need, as the people, must hold them accountable and stop them from just doing whatever the hell they want.
I think it's really interesting talking about this vibe-ish politics thing, because I don't know if anyone else saw the Jeremy Kyle sort of piece on Donald Trump, sort of, you know, talking to everyone, all of these kind of despots, from the Middle East, like saying, you know, he's an incredible leader, like, you know, say hello to your beautiful wife, you know, all of this stuff, because that man to me epitomizes exactly what I think this woman, no relation whatsoever, was trying to say, is this sort of this lack of, I guess, kind of political seriousness that hasn't really had much of an impact on whether, you know, Trump necessarily got into power. And I think that's kind of the point that I think I'm trying to make, is that politics these days is about more of a vibe. And you just kind of have to look at how, you know, what Trump has done and what he's been able to do in the really short time he's been in power, to show you that seriousness in politics is not really, you know, it's all to play for these days. So I think that's kind of, as a shy reform voter as well, you know, I may not look like the kind of typical person who would vote reform, but freedom of speech allowed today, apparently. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're getting at here, is that it's, with social media and everything, it's like, there's no kind of traditional way of doing this anymore, I'm afraid. So happy to debate it with you after.
I speak as somebody that's been in the Labour Party for 49 years. I'm not sure why I'm still there. It's not the economic policy of the Labour Party that will win the next election. It's not any policy. It's whether or not people trust Labour to represent them. Does Labour represent the British people in this country? At the moment, reform is, to some extent, an empty book. But people are writing in there what they want. And their first government may well be a disaster, but at the moment, they're recipients of the trust because they are saying things that nobody else will say. And people are projecting their hopes into what they're offering. Labour is not.
So the question was, will the working class find its voice? I think we'll only find our voice not by trusting in any party, but demanding that our voice is heard and making it heard and actually taking responsibility. And part of that is in looking at what the problems are and finding the solutions ourselves, not subcontracting it to other people every 4 or 5 years.
This is something I think I've soiled this whole weekend, and that is this idea that there should be some kind of pristine politics going on. It's in particular in reference to reform. There's a demand that they should be bang on, that we should understand everything and that we know other policies. But the point about populism, as I understand it, is it's much more exciting than that. We are taking a punt, and so we should, because I trust ordinary people more than I tend to trust politicians. And so, indeed, it is up to us to make sure that what happens next is in our interests and continues down this exciting road.
Right, taking a punt is exciting. Oh, it's quite exciting. I'm quite pleased by that. Right, anyway, okay. Johnny, you give us your last thoughts.
Yeah, so a few things came up about identity there, and I think you're right. Basically, the identity of politicians is by the by. You got two Labour deputy leadership candidates at the moment just going, oh, I'm Northern, oh, I'm a woman, oh, I'm working class folk Yorkshireman, as you said. Whereas you got Rust Belt people, sort of former Democrat steelworkers voting for a multi-billionaire sort of presidential candidate, you know, just because, as you say, they feel like he's sort of honestly dishonest, I suppose, sometimes, you know, and he's an iconoclast, he's a kind of a plague on both of their houses type thing. So what's the vibe? If it's all about vibes, what vibe is the cabinet giving off? You know, Keir Starmer oozes metropolitan, loyally technocrat. No matter how much he tries to do blue Labour vibes on migration, on patriotism, it's not going to happen. Everyone knows he's talking nonsense. So,
yeah. I mean, the vibe that's really important is the spirit of populism, because it's the spirit that has captured the imagination of so many people that has led them to demand something a little bit better. And I think we've got to realize that there are many problems with the existing political system, the most important of which is the intuitively anti-democratic temper of Labour and the Conservatives. I mean, these are the parties that are introducing voting at the age of 16, and if they thought they could get away with it, they would reduce that to 12 or maybe even 8, because they have no democrat. These are the parties that are introduced two-tier policing, that have taken a double standard in the way that the law is enforced in this country. And I could give you a long list of anti-democratic sentiments, which both part, even the grooming gang scandal. It's all very well to blame Labour for that, but the Conservatives weren't conspicuously the crusaders for freedom in this respect. They were also, to some extent, responsible for what has happened. So we have to recognize that there is a problem that we're confronting at the moment, but the most exciting thing for me is this vibe of the populist spirit. I think that something has changed, and a lot of people that were too scared to open their mouth, that self-censored for years and years and years, are now prepared to stand up and be counted.
Thank you very much.
I think Claire was absolutely right to talk about the quality of questions and the importance of rooms like this. But I think what it shows is the sheer amount of frustration that feel I pick it up in focus groups around the country. Other people here have talked about it. And I think my thing is, you know, when it comes to 2029, whatever that government looks like, whether it's a reform government, reform Conservative coalition, whether it's a blue Labour-led Labour government, where it's whatever it is, politics, it's easy for me to say I'm on the sidelines, but need to up their game, because I really, really worry about what happens if the next government doesn't work out as well.
Thank you. Wayne?
Just following up what Scarlett just said, our attitude is, and those comments previously, if we have another 5 years of what we have today, what we know as our country will be gone. That is our feeling. And so if you talk to reform people around the country, as I do, they feel that there is no alternative other than to win. Now, this plays into the vibe, politics and all the rest of it. It really does. But we feel it's absolutely essential to win. But what keeps us awake at night is delivering. It's all very well winning, we will. But to deliver on the promises that we will be making is the biggest single thing. And the fact is, right now, we're not sure. You've got the judiciary, you've got the House of Lords, you've got the civil service, you've got the trade unions, you've got the media, you've got major international corporations, all of these lined up against a possible Farage-led government. And so, therefore, that aspect of delivery is what keeps us awake at night. I spoke to a couple of Tory MPs, a few weeks ago, that, when the light gets in, and they said, all right, Gwaine, yeah, fine, you'll not win the next election, but you'll make such a hash of it, the country will be begging for us to come back. Oh, brother, they won't be. Après nous le déluge, if we fail.
Yeah, so just to pick up and lead into my final remarks on the identity politics point, we at one point had a cabinet that was wholly state educated, and people in the Labour Party were really celebrating it and saying, yeah, that's great, etc. But we all know that that isn't actually what connects people to the working class. The point is, they don't really care. We're over it, and that's a fantastic thing. And we should really celebrate the fact that people are willing to elect people of all different classes and ethnicities and so forth. That's fantastic. And I do think there's an issue with the online right, which is bubbling up. They're doing their own sort of identity politics, as if you can't be English if you're a certain skin colour and so forth. So I think there's a risk that they fall into that similar trap that the far left did. But on that note, to give a point of optimism for those who are Labour in the room, Shabana Mahmood is a very exciting appointment as Home Secretary. She really gets this stuff, and if anyone can actually get to grips with it during this Labour term, then I think it's her. So there's a big pivot to be made, but we can do it.